Chapter 6, Cause of the Fall of the Emperor. We have exhibited in the preceding chapters all the chances of duration which the imperial creations possess, but will it be said the edifice of the interior, which you deem so solid and firm, has been overturned? That foreign policy, which you consider so profound, has proved the cause of his ruin? We reply, the edifice of the interior was solid and firm, for the shock which overturned it did not come from the interior. As for the system conceived by the emperor, it was not definitively established, and it would have been necessary to put it into operation in order to demonstrate its strength. The emperor fell because he completed his work too hastily, because events pressing too rapidly, he conquered too promptly, anticipating by his genius both time and men. When fortunate, he was regarded as a god. When unfortunate, nothing was perceived but his rashness. Borne along by the current of victory, his rapid course cannot be followed by the philosophers who, restricting their ideas to the narrow circle of the domestic hearth, on account of a gleam of liberty, aided in quenching the very fire of civilization. At the same time, foreign nations, impatient of the temporary evils of war, forgot the benefits which Napoleon brought them, and on account of a transient ill, rejected the whole future of independence. It was not within the power of even the greatest genius of modern times, in so few years, to destroy in foreign countries all prejudices and convince all consciences. France had become too great, in consequence of the revolution, not to awaken rivalries and hatreds. In order to appease them, it would have been necessary to descend in the scale from the time of the commencement of the empire. But these very rivalries caused Napoleon to mount to the climax of his power. When afterwards he was obliged to descend, he could not stop in his downward course. Time not having cemented his alliances or effaced the memory of two recent enmities, his allies, upon the first check, turned against him. Deceived in his expectations, the emperor refused to accept propositions which he did not think sincere. The enemy, on his side, seeing Napoleon always more haughty after defeat, thought that he never would consent to a definitive peace. Napoleon's plans were constantly enlarged in proportion with the elements which he had at his disposition, and he fell because he desired to accomplish 10 years of work which would have required several generations. Not then in consequence of impotence did the emperor succumb, but in consequence of exhaustion. And in spite of his terrible reverses and innumerable calamities, the French people always supported him by the suffrages, sustained him by their efforts, and encouraged him by their attachment. It is a consolation to those who feel the blood of a great man flowing through their veins to think of the regrets which accompanied his removal. It is a great and profound thought that it required all the efforts of allied Europe to tear Napoleon from France, which he had rendered so glorious. It was not the French people in their wrath who overturned his throne. It required twice 1,200 foreign swords to break his imperial scepter. Full of beauty and honor are the obsequies of the sovereign whom a nation in tears and glory clothed in mourning accompanied to his last resting place. Chapter 7, conclusion. The period of the empire was a war of life and death waged by England against France. England triumphed, but thanks to the creative genius of Napoleon, France, though vanquished, has lost substantially less than England. The finances of France are still the most prosperous in Europe. England bends under the weight of debt. The impulse given to industry and to commerce has not been stopped in spite of our reverses, and at this time the European continent supplies itself with the greater part of the produce which England formerly supplied. Now we ask, who are the greatest statesmen? Those who have ruled over countries which have gained in spite of defeat, or those who have governed countries which have lost in spite of victory? The period of the emperor and the empire was a war of life and death against the old European system. The old system has triumphed, But in spite of the fall of Napoleon, the Napoleonic ideas have germinated everywhere. The victors have even adopted the ideas of the vanquished, and the people consume themselves in efforts to rebuild what Napoleon had established among them. In France, the realization of the ideas of the emperor under other names or other forms is demanded without cessation. If a great measure or a great work is put in execution, it is generally a project of Napoleon, which is proceeded with or finished. Every act of power, every proposition of the chambers places itself under the aegis of Napoleon in order to secure popularity, and upon a word fallen from his lips, a whole system is built. Italy and Poland have endeavored to recover the national organization which Napoleon had given to them. Spain sheds profusely the blood of her children in order to reestablish the institutions which the Consultum of Bayonne in 1808 guaranteed. The troubles which agitate her are but the reaction which spontaneously arises after resistance to the ideas of the emperor. At London, also, a reaction has taken place, and the major general of the French army at Waterloo has been feted by the English people like a conqueror. Belgium, in 1830, manifested distinctly her desire to become again what she was under the empire. Several countries of Germany asked urgently for the laws which Napoleon gave them. The Swiss cantons unanimously prefer the Act of Mediation of 1803 to the compact which unites them. Finally, we have even in a democratic republic Bern, those districts which formerly belonged to France, demand in 1838 from the government of Bern the imperial laws of which their incorporation with that republic has deprived them since 1815. Let us then ask again, who are the greatest statesmen? Those who found a system which crumbles in spite of their all-sufficient power, or those who found a system which survives their defeat and rises from its ruins? The Napoleonic ideas have then the character of ideas which control the movement of society, since they advance by their own force. Although deprived of their author, like a body which launched into space arrives by its own momentum and weight at the end designed, there is no longer any necessity to reconstruct the system of the emperor. It will reconstruct itself. Sovereigns and nations will occur in reestablishing it because each one will see in it a guarantee of order, of peace, and of prosperity. Besides, where can we find at this day the extraordinary man who can command the attention of the world by the respect due to the superiority of his conceptions and ideas? The genius of our epoch has need only of simple reason. 30 years ago, it was necessary to foresee and prepare. Now it's a question only of correct appreciation and of careful collection and arrangement. In contemporary, as in historical facts, Napoleon has said, lessons may be found, but really, models? It is impossible to copy that which has been done because imitations do not always produce resemblances. In fact, to copy in the details instead of copy in the spirit. A past government would be to act like a general who, finding himself upon the same field of battle where Napoleon or Frederick had conquered, should undertake to secure victory by repeating the same maneuvers. In reading the history of nations as the history of battles, it is necessary to draw general principles without confining oneself to follow servilely, step by step, vestiges which are imprinted not upon sand, but upon a more elevated ground, the interests of humanity. In conclusion, let us repeat it. The Napoleonic idea is not one of war, but a social, industrial, commercial idea, and one which concerns all mankind. If to some it appears always surrounded by the thunder of combats, that is because it was in fact for too long a time veiled by the smoke of cannon and the dust of battles. But now the clouds are dispersed and we can see beyond the glory of arms a civil glory greater and more enduring. May the shade of the emperor repose then in peace. His memory grows greater every day. Every surge that breaks upon the rock of St. Helena, responding to a whisper of Europe, brings an homage to his memory, a regret to his ashes, and the echo of Longwood repeats over his tomb. The enfranchised nations are occupied everywhere in reestablishing thy work.